The summer heat that year was brutal. Every afternoon, the neighborhood seemed to shimmer under the sun's relentless glare. Kids rode bikes with flushed cheeks. Joggers gave up halfway through their runs, and lawns turned brown almost overnight. For me, the one saving grace of living in that HOA control neighborhood was the community pool. It wasn't fancy, just a rectangular oasis tucked behind the clubhouse with a few lounge chairs, an umbrella or two, and the faint smell of chlorine that always hung in the air. But to me, it felt like heaven. I had a routine. Finish work, grab a towel, slip into my sandals, and head down to the pool for an hour of cool relief. It wasn't just about swimming. It was about having a place to unwind, to relax without feeling the weight of bills, deadlines, or the daily grind. The pool was my sanctuary, a small slice of freedom in a neighborhood otherwise suffocated by the overbearing HOA and its endless rules. But little did I know, that sanctuary was about to become the stage for one of the most ridiculous battles I'd ever been a part of. And at the center of it all was a woman who seemed to think the pool was her personal kingdom. Her name, at least as everyone whispered it, was Karen. She was infamous in our neighborhood long before I crossed her path. She was the kind of person who thrived on confrontation, someone who saw every minor inconvenience as a crime against her. People said she once called the HOA over a neighbor's lawn being a shade too long. Another time, she'd reported kids for playing tag too loudly. To her, control wasn't just a desire, it was her mission in life. I had seen her around, of course, always strutting across the cul-de-sac with her oversized sunglasses, clutching her phone like it was a weapon, and carrying herself with the smug authority of someone who thought she was untouchable. But until that summer afternoon, I had never had a personal run-in with her. The pool was quiet when it happened. A few kids splashed in the shallow end, a teenager scrolled on their phone in the corner, and I was stretched out on a chair with a cold drink beside me. The air hummed with the faint buzz of cicadas, and for a moment, life felt perfect. Then I heard the click of sandals on the pavement, sharp and deliberate, like the sound of someone marching into battle. Karen. She approached the pool deck like she owned the place, scanning the area with narrowed eyes, as if she was searching for some invisible violation to pounce on. Her gaze landed on me, and I instantly felt the weight of her disapproval. It was strange, really. I wasn't breaking any rules. I wasn't blasting music, hogging chairs, or causing a scene. I was just existing. But that seemed to be enough to set her off. In that moment, I didn't yet realize it, but Karen had a vision for the pool. In her mind, it was a private club reserved for people she deemed worthy. She didn't like sharing space, didn't like anyone challenging her imaginary authority. And me, with my calm contentment and refusal to bow to her silent intimidation, was about to become her target. Her campaign began subtly. The first time, she hovered near the edge of the pool, pacing with folded arms, casting looks that were sharp enough to cut. Then she started muttering under her breath, just loud enough for me to catch fragments of disdain, comments about outsiders and rules. Still, I ignored her, hoping she would get bored and move on. But Karen didn't get bored. She escalated. The next day, when I returned to the pool, she was already there, planted in a chair like a sentinel. She gave me a look that screamed ownership, as if to say, "This is my turf." I walked past her, set my things down, and tried to enjoy myself, but her presence loomed over everything. She stood up, walked around, and lingered far too close, as if trying to intimidate me into leaving. I brushed it off again, but Karen wasn't the type to accept being ignored. Each day, her tactics grew bolder. She started patrolling the pool, pacing back and forth with exaggerated sighs whenever I swam. She'd check the rule board near the entrance, then glare at me, as though she was searching for a technicality she could use against me. Other neighbors began to notice too, whispering as they watched the tension build. It was only a matter of time before she made her move. And when she finally did, it wasn't subtle, it was explosive. On the fourth day of her campaign, she stormed up to the pool deck with the confidence of someone convinced she was the law itself. She positioned herself in front of me, blocking the sun, and unleashed her tirade. Her words poured out fast and sharp, accusing me of breaking rules, trespassing, and ruining the environment of the pool. She declared, in no uncertain terms, that I didn't belong there and demanded I leave immediately. The audacity of it stunned me. I had every right to be there. I paid my HOA dues like everyone else, followed every posted rule, and respected the space. Yet here was Karen, trying to exile me from the very pool my money helped maintain. The kids in the shallow end froze mid-splash. The teenager put their phone down, suddenly alert. Every eye was on us. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about Karen trying to assert dominance over the entire neighborhood. I refused to budge. I stayed calm, collected, and silent. But my refusal to leave was all it took to send Karen spiraling into a full-blown tantrum. Her voice grew louder, her arms flailed, and her face turned a shade of red that matched the poolside umbrellas. Neighbors began to gather near the gate, drawn by the commotion. That day, Karen crossed a line she could never uncross. Because in trying to humiliate me, she ended up exposing herself to the entire community. And though I didn't know it yet, her downfall had already begun. As the chaos unfolded, one thing became clear. This battle wasn't going to end at the poolside. It was just the beginning of a war that would change everything. The afternoon after Karen's outburst, the neighborhood buzzed with whispers. It didn't take long for word of the pool confrontation to spread. People exchanged stories at mailboxes, murmured while walking their dogs, and passed along exaggerated versions of events during evening strolls. By the time the sun set, it seemed like everyone knew about Karen's attempt to eject me from the community pool. But instead of feeling embarrassed, Karen thrived on the attention. She carried herself with even more swagger than before, strutting around the neighborhood as though she had done everyone a service by enforcing the rules. To her, this wasn't humiliation, it was fuel. What most people didn't realize was that Karen fed on conflict. For her, every battle was proof of her self-appointed authority. She didn't see herself as a neighbor or equal member of the community. She saw herself as a guardian of order, someone destined to wield control over others, no matter how small or meaningless the issue. And now, having targeted me, she was determined not to let the matter drop. The very next day, I noticed her at the pool again. She wasn't swimming. She wasn't relaxing. She wasn't even pretending to enjoy the space. She was patrolling, walking the perimeter, glaring at every person who entered, inspecting towels, snacks, and sunscreen bottles as though they were contraband. She had a clipboard in hand, which she clutched like it was a badge of authority. I watched from my usual spot, trying to remain calm, but her antics were impossible to ignore. She scribbled notes furiously whenever someone set down their belongings. She snapped photos of the rule board, zooming in as if preparing evidence for some imaginary trial. And every so often, she would stop to make direct eye contact with me, her expression dripping with smug satisfaction. By the end of the week, Karen had transformed the pool into her personal battleground. She stationed herself there daily, sometimes for hours, watching like a hawk. Parents grew uncomfortable bringing their kids. Teens avoided the place altogether, and the once busy afternoons turned eerily quiet. The sanctuary that once gave me peace now felt like hostile territory. It became obvious that Karen wasn't just targeting me anymore. She had declared herself the self-appointed pool sheriff, and anyone who dared enjoy the space without her approval was a potential target. But make no mistake, her main focus was still me. Every glare, every scribbled note, every muttered insult circled back to one mission: forcing me out. Her power trip escalated when she decided to involve the HOA. A letter arrived in my mailbox a few days later, sealed with the association's logo. My stomach sank as I opened it, half expecting the worst. Inside was a formal notice claiming I had been reported for disruptive behavior at the pool. The letter alleged that I violated several community guidelines, including failure to respect other residents and misuse of shared amenities. It was laughable. I had done nothing but swim quietly and mind my own business. But Karen's fingerprints were all over that complaint. She had twisted reality into something unrecognizable and presented herself as the victim. I wasn't the only one receiving letters, either. Neighbors began comparing notes, realizing Karen had filed multiple complaints against various families. One accused a father of endangering the community because he taught his daughter to dive. Another accused a group of teenagers of destruction of property for leaving wet footprints on the pool deck. Each letter reeked of Karen's dramatics, designed to scare people into compliance. For many, the fear worked. Parents started avoiding the pool altogether, not wanting to risk Karen's wrath. The laughter and splashes that once filled the air grew scarce, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. It was as though Karen had successfully cast a shadow over the entire community, holding the pool hostage with her relentless vigilance. But for me, her intimidation had the opposite effect. I refused to surrender my sanctuary to her pettiness. Each evening, I continued my routine, towel in hand, drink by my side, calm as ever. I knew that if I caved, Karen would only grow bolder. And though I couldn't predict it yet, my persistence would become the very thing that exposed her lies. Karen, of course, interpreted my resilience as defiance. She doubled down on her campaign, arriving earlier and staying later, determined to catch me in some violation. She scrutinized every detail of my behavior from the time I arrived to the exact way I folded my towel. She snapped photos of me lounging in a chair, as if evidence of relaxation could somehow prove misconduct. Her obsession became obvious to anyone watching. Some neighbors found it amusing, others found it disturbing. But to Karen, it was serious business. She believed she was on the verge of victory, that one more complaint would tip the scales and finally rid her of me. That's when she made her biggest mistake. One blistering Saturday afternoon, the pool was unusually busy. Families gathered, kids played, and neighbors sought relief in the heat. Karen, perched in her usual spot with her clipboard, looked overwhelmed by the sheer number of violations she believed she was witnessing. Her pen flew across the paper as she documented every splash, every laugh, every snack wrapper that wasn't immediately thrown away. Then she saw me. I had just finished a swim and was drying off when Karen stormed toward me, waving her clipboard like a weapon. Her voice rose above the noise, her accusations sharp and direct. She claimed I was trespassing, that I wasn't a paying member, that I was using the pool illegally. The words stung, not because they were true, but because they were so absurdly false. I had the receipts, the dues, and the membership card to prove it. Neighbors froze, watching the spectacle unfold. Kids stopped mid-splash, parents exchanged uneasy glances, and even the lifeguard hesitated, unsure of how to intervene. Karen's voice grew louder, echoing across the water. She demanded that I leave immediately or face serious consequences. But this time, the crowd wasn't on her side. People began murmuring, shaking their heads, and rolling their eyes. They had seen enough of Karen's theatrics to know the truth. And though I remained calm, refusing to leave, it was the witnesses around us who would ultimately tip the balance. Karen had crossed the line between petty annoyance and outright harassment. And the neighborhood, once too intimidated to fight back, was beginning to take notice. As I sat back down in my chair, towel draped across my shoulders, I realized the tide was finally turning. Karen's power trip had reached its peak, and from here, it could only spiral downward. The day Karen accused me of trespassing marked a turning point. Until then, most neighbors had treated her antics like background noise. Annoying, yes, but not worth a confrontation. She had always been the self-appointed rule enforcer, the busybody who lived to complain. People rolled their eyes, whispered in private, and did their best to avoid her. But now, Karen had gone too far, and she had chosen the wrong battlefield. Her outburst at the pool wasn't just aimed at me. It had humiliated everyone who witnessed it. Parents trying to enjoy a rare moment of peace with their kids had been disrupted. Teenagers, who only wanted to cool off on a hot afternoon, had been embarrassed in front of their peers. Even the lifeguard, a high school student working a summer job, looked shaken after being berated by her. For the first time, the neighborhood saw Karen not just as a nuisance, but as a threat to their enjoyment of community life. The whispers began almost immediately. People spoke at the mailboxes, in hushed tones on porches, and even at the grocery store. "She can't keep doing this," they said. Someone has to put a stop to it. And slowly, a sense of unity began to form. A rare phenomenon in a neighborhood otherwise divided by petty HOA rules and disagreements over lawn maintenance. I became the reluctant symbol of that unity. Neighbors started approaching me, sharing their own run-ins with Karen. One woman explained how Karen had accused her of endangering lives for leaving a pool toy unattended. A father described how Karen had reported him for destructive behavior because his kids dripped water on the pavement. Teenagers admitted that they had stopped going to the pool entirely, too tired of her constant surveillance. For the first time, I saw the full scope of Karen's campaign of control. It wasn't just me. She had been targeting the entire neighborhood for months, maybe even years. My refusal to back down at the pool had simply exposed her behavior in a way that could no longer be ignored. But Karen, blinded by her obsession, didn't see it that way. She believed she was winning. To her, every complaint she filed and every accusation she hurled was another step toward cementing her authority. She walked around with her clipboard like it was a crown, speaking loudly at the clubhouse meetings about maintaining standards and protecting the community. She believed she was untouchable. What she didn't realize was that the neighborhood was quietly organizing against her. It started small. A few neighbors drafted a group email, swapping stories and collecting evidence of Karen's harassment. Photos, dates, times, and even videos were shared, each one painting a picture of a woman out of control. Parents uploaded recordings of her screaming at kids. Teenagers posted clips of her pacing the pool deck like a prison guard. And I contributed my own experiences, documenting every letter and accusation she had sent my way. Soon, the group grew. People who had once stayed silent now felt emboldened to share their grievances. The email thread became a rallying point, a place where frustration turned into action. What began as scattered complaints transformed into a united front. The neighborhood, long intimidated by Karen's outbursts, was ready to fight back. Karen remained oblivious. She strutted through the community as though she had already won the war, her confidence swelling with each passing day. She continued patrolling the pool, snapping photos, and muttering under her breath. She didn't notice the sideways glances, the whispered conversations, or the fact that fewer and fewer people greeted her when she walked by. The real turning point came at the next HOA meeting. The clubhouse, usually half empty during these monthly gatherings, was packed to capacity. Residents filled every chair, stood against the walls, and spilled out into the hallway. The air buzzed with anticipation, a collective energy that Karen didn't recognize. When her turn to speak came, Karen launched into her usual tirade. She described the dangers of pool misuse, the disrespect of certain residents, and the urgent need for stricter enforcement. She painted herself as a lone warrior, bravely protecting the neighborhood from chaos. But this time, instead of nods or polite silence, she was met with stony faces. And when she finished, the floodgates opened. One by one, neighbors stood up. They described how Karen had harassed their children, disrupted family time, and made the pool an unpleasant place to be. Parents recounted specific incidents. Teenagers shared how they no longer felt welcome. Even elderly residents spoke up, admitting they avoided the pool out of fear of becoming her next target. Each testimony chipped away at the facade of authority Karen had built for herself. I sat quietly, listening as the momentum grew. I didn't need to speak. My story had already been told through others. The neighborhood had seen enough. By the end of the meeting, the HOA board, usually slow to act, was visibly shaken. They promised to investigate the claims, review the evidence, and address the issue. For the first time, Karen's reign of intimidation was officially under scrutiny. Karen, however, didn't back down. As she left the clubhouse that night, she muttered angrily, shaking her head as though everyone else was crazy and she was the only sane person in the room. She still believed she was right. She still believed she was in control. But the tide had turned. The neighborhood was no longer afraid. The whispers had become voices, and the voices had become action. Karen's power trip was unraveling, and she didn't even see it happening. As I walked home that night, I felt a shift in the air. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, it wasn't just me against Karen. It was the entire neighborhood standing together. And that unity, I realized, was something even Karen couldn't control. What none of us knew, though, was just how far Karen would go once she realized her grip was slipping. The coming weeks would reveal the depths of her desperation and the lengths she was willing to go to keep her imagined throne. In the days following the HOA meeting, the neighborhood's mood shifted. For once, there was a spark of optimism in the air. People began using the pool again, cautiously at first, but with a sense of reclaiming something that had been stolen from them. Families brought their kids, teenagers returned in groups, and laughter echoed across the water once more. It was as though the residents had decided, collectively, that they would not allow one person's obsession to dictate their lives. But Karen wasn't finished. If anything, the backlash only fueled her desperation. To her, the complaints, the testimonies, and the growing unity of the neighborhood weren't signs that she had gone too far. They were proof of a conspiracy. She convinced herself that she was the victim of a smear campaign orchestrated by people who wanted to undermine her authority. It was almost comical how far her delusion stretched. She paraded through the neighborhood with her clipboard still clutched in her hand, as though it gave her legitimacy. Her mutterings grew louder, no longer whispers but proclamations. She told anyone who would listen that she had evidence of rule-breaking, that she was the only one standing between the neighborhood and chaos. And then came her escalation. One afternoon, while I was at the pool, Karen arrived not with her usual clipboard, but with a stack of printed papers. She walked from chair to chair, shoving them into the hands of whoever would take one. It was a crudely written report, several pages long, listing supposed violations committed by various residents. My name appeared more than once, circled in red ink like I was some kind of criminal. She accused me of loitering, damaging property, and even inciting disorder. Others were accused of everything from excessive splashing to public indecency for simply changing toddlers into swimsuits behind towels. The absurdity would have been funny if it weren't so unsettling. Parents read their names on the list and shook their heads in disbelief. Teenagers rolled their eyes, holding back laughter. But beneath the amusement was a layer of unease. This wasn't just harmless gossip anymore. Karen was creating written records, distributing them, and treating her accusations as fact. It didn't take long for someone to march those papers straight to the HOA board. Within days, the board issued a stern warning to Karen, reminding her that she had no authority to distribute official documents on behalf of the community. They demanded she cease her activities immediately, warning her of potential disciplinary action if she persisted. For most people, that would have been the end of it, but not for Karen. If anything, the warning made her more unhinged. She began lurking at the pool after hours, long after the lifeguard had gone home and the gates were supposed to be locked. Residents reported seeing her pacing the deck in the dark, flashlight in hand, scribbling in her notebook as though she were conducting surveillance. Others claimed she had peered through the clubhouse windows late at night, searching for evidence of misuse. By now, the neighborhood had grown used to Karen's antics, but her behavior was crossing into something more disturbing. Parents grew nervous again, hesitant to let their kids swim unsupervised. Some joked that Karen was haunting the pool, but the laughter carried an undercurrent of discomfort. It wasn't funny anymore, it was unsettling. The HOA board called an emergency meeting to address the growing concerns. This time, the tone was different. The evidence against Karen was undeniable. Photos of her patrolling the pool at midnight, videos of her passing out her reports, and countless testimonies from residents who had endured her harassment. The board made it clear they were considering banning her from the pool altogether. The idea seemed unthinkable at first. After all, the pool was part of the community amenities, something every dues-paying resident was entitled to use. But Karen had turned it into her personal stage, and the damage she was causing outweighed her right to be there. News of the possible ban spread quickly, and the neighborhood buzzed with anticipation. Some were skeptical, doubting the HOA would ever follow through. Others were hopeful, desperate for a resolution to months of tension. And Karen? She was furious. She stormed into the next meeting like a tempest, papers flying, voice raised to a near shout. She accused the board of corruption, claimed the neighborhood was colluding against her, and threatened to take legal action. Her tirade lasted nearly 20 minutes, during which she refused to sit down or let anyone else speak. But in her desperation, she made a critical mistake. In her attempt to prove her authority, Karen pulled out what she claimed was irrefutable evidence of residents breaking rules. She waved around photographs, but instead of proving her case, they revealed something far worse. She had been secretly taking pictures of neighbors, some of them children, without their consent. Parents gasped as they recognized their kids in swimsuits, captured without permission and paraded in front of the entire community. The room fell silent. The board members exchanged horrified glances. And in that moment, Karen lost whatever shred of credibility she had left. The outrage was immediate. Parents demanded action, their voices rising in anger. Even those who had once been indifferent were now firmly united against her. The board had no choice. They suspended Karen's pool privileges pending a full review, effectively banning her from the very place she had tried to control. But if the neighborhood thought that would be the end, they were wrong. Karen wasn't going to fade quietly into the background. Her desperation hadn't reached its peak yet. Stripped of her access, she grew more erratic, more unpredictable, and more determined to fight back by any means necessary. The pool was finally peaceful again, but a storm was brewing just beyond the surface. And everyone knew Karen wasn't finished. The suspension of Karen's pool privileges sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. For years, she had strutted across the community with unchecked confidence, wielding her imaginary authority like a weapon. Now, for the first time, she had been stripped of the very place that symbolized her control. The pool, the stage where she had carried out her campaign of intimidation, was off limits to her. For most people, that kind of public embarrassment would have been enough to trigger quiet retreat. They would have kept their heads down, avoided attention, and waited for the storm to blow over. But Karen wasn't like most people. Instead of shame, she felt rage. Instead of self-reflection, she clung to delusion. To her, the suspension wasn't justice. It was betrayal. She didn't hide her anger. In fact, she made sure everyone saw it. She paced her yard with her phone pressed against her ear, speaking loudly enough for neighbors to overhear snippets of her conversations. She muttered about lawsuits, threatened to take the board down, and claimed she had friends in high places. Whether those claims were real or imaginary didn't matter. They were designed to intimidate. And when intimidation didn't work, Karen turned to spectacle. The very next weekend, she staged her protest. At the hottest part of the afternoon, when families were splashing happily in the pool, Karen marched to the gates carrying a stack of handmade signs. The words, painted in thick black strokes, declared slogans like "Save our community" and "Stop the corruption." She planted herself at the entrance, blocking the way, shouting at anyone who passed. It was surreal. Parents clutching beach bags had to maneuver around her. Children clung nervously to their towels, and teenagers laughed nervously at the absurdity of it all. Karen's voice carried across the water, a constant stream of accusations and demands. She claimed the HOA was conspiring against her, that the neighborhood was falling into chaos without her, that the pool was now a lawless swamp. Her protest lasted hours. By the time the sun dipped lower in the sky, most people had left, not because they were intimidated, but because the constant shouting had ruined any sense of relaxation. The once lively pool was empty, echoing only with Karen's voice as she ranted into the twilight. The HOA board responded swiftly. They issued another warning, this time threatening fines and additional sanctions if Karen continued disrupting community spaces. But Karen didn't stop. She escalated again. She began mailing letters, thick envelopes stuffed with rambling accusations, delivered not just to the board but to individual residents. Each letter painted her as a martyr, unfairly targeted for trying to uphold standards. Some spanned 10 pages, filled with underlined words, exclamation points, and grainy photocopies of her so-called evidence. Neighbors compared the letters, shaking their heads at the absurdity, but the sheer volume of them was exhausting. It was as if Karen was trying to drown the entire community in paper. Her antics might have been comical if they hadn't been tinged with something darker. Late one night, several neighbors reported seeing her parked outside the pool, headlights off, sitting silently in her car. Another claimed to have spotted her wandering the clubhouse grounds in the early hours of the morning. Whether these stories were exaggerated or not didn't matter. The effect was the same. Unease spread through the neighborhood. But the final straw came during the 4th of July celebration. The HOA had planned a modest event at the pool. A barbecue, some games for the kids, and a small fireworks display once the sun set. It was meant to be a chance for the neighborhood to come together to rebuild a sense of community after months of tension. For a while it worked. Laughter returned, music played, and the pool was alive with energy again. Then Karen arrived. She marched to the pool gates with the same defiance she had carried for weeks. But this time, she wasn't alone. She dragged a wheeled cooler behind her, rattling as it rolled across the pavement. When she reached the gate, she attempted to push her way in, loudly declaring that she had every right to be there. The board members, stationed nearby, blocked her path. That's when the scene exploded. Karen shoved the cooler forward, its lid flipping open to reveal stacks of papers, more of her endless evidence. She began flinging them into the air, page after page scattering across the ground, drifting into the pool, and sticking to wet feet. She screamed about corruption, betrayal, and injustice, her voice cracking as fireworks popped faintly in the distance. The crowd froze in disbelief. Children clung to their parents, teenagers recorded on their phones, and neighbors whispered in stunned silence. For all her past theatrics, this was different. This was a full public breakdown, raw and unrestrained. Security was called. Karen fought them every step of the way, her voice echoing across the water until she was finally escorted off the property, her scattered papers floating like debris in the pool behind her. The celebration resumed eventually, but the energy had shifted. People no longer saw Karen as just a nuisance or busybody. They saw her as unstable, someone who had crossed every line and burned every bridge. The HOA board met again the very next week. This time, the vote was unanimous. Karen wasn't just suspended anymore. She was permanently banned from the community pool. Her keycard access was revoked, her privileges revoked, and the decision was written into the official records. Word spread like wildfire. Neighbors couldn't stop talking about it. Some celebrated openly, clinking glasses at backyard barbecues. Others shook their heads in disbelief, marveling at how far Karen had fallen. Children cheered when they heard the news, their summer finally free of her looming presence. But Karen didn't disappear quietly. She couldn't. Her identity had been built around control, and without it, she was unmoored. Neighbors reported hearing her shouting from her yard late at night, railing against the injustice. Others claimed she was plotting some kind of revenge, though no one knew exactly what that meant. The pool, at last, was peaceful again. Families returned, laughter filled the air, and the sanctuary I once cherished was restored. But there was still an unease in the background, a lingering question that no one wanted to voice out loud. What would Karen do next? Because if one thing was certain, it was this: Karen wasn't finished. Not yet. The morning after Karen's 4th of July meltdown, the neighborhood felt different. The pool gate stayed closed longer than usual, and the clubhouse sat quiet. Families who normally rushed out with towels and sunscreen lingered indoors. It wasn't exhaustion from the holiday. It was the fallout of what everyone had witnessed. But this time, the HOA didn't hesitate. Within days, a letter went out to every resident. The decision was final. Karen was permanently banned from the community pool and clubhouse amenities. Her keycard was deactivated. Her name was added to the restricted list. If she tried to enter again, she'd be trespassing on her own neighborhood's property. The reaction was instant. Relief swept through the streets. Parents cheered, Kids laughed, and neighbors finally felt free to enjoy the summer without Karen's constant glare or endless reports. The pool, once suffocated by tension, came alive again with splashing, laughter, and music. It was as if a storm had finally passed. Karen, of course, didn't go quietly. Neighbors heard her muttering in her yard at night, still shouting about conspiracies and corruption. She fired off rambling emails to the board, filled with threats and capital letters. But it didn't matter anymore. Her power was gone. She had lost the one stage where she could perform her self-appointed role as neighborhood enforcer. For me, the change was life-changing. The pool was mine again, not just mine, but everyone's. No glades, no interruptions, no absurd accusations. Just sunshine, cool water, and peace. And as the summer ended with the annual back-to-school party, the neighborhood celebrated more than just a new school year. We celebrated freedom. We celebrated unity. We celebrated the fact that one person's obsession no longer had control over our community. Karen had tried to kick me out of the pool, but in the end, she was the one who got kicked out, banned for life. And honestly, I couldn't have asked for a better ending. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you never miss more wild HOA, Karen, and neighborhood drama stories. Have you ever had a Karen in your neighborhood? Drop your experience in the comments below. I'd love to read them.